The zip ties bit into Greg Beaver's wrists before he could get a single word out. Not handcuffs. Zip ties. The kind you use on a suspect who can't be trusted to stay still. Deputy Benjamin Davis had pulled them from his vest with the casual confidence of a man who had done this before, to men who looked exactly like Greg, and never once been told he was wrong. It wasn't just a detainment. It was a declaration. Special Agent Gregory Beavers, 12-year veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Counterterrorism Division, stood in the gravel parking lot of a Baton Rouge gas station with his hands bound behind his back, his credentials face down in the dirt where Davis had tossed them, and the afternoon sun burning the back of his neck. He had pulled over to make a secure call. He had done nothing wrong. He had shown his badge the moment Davis approached. None of that mattered. Because Davis looked at Greg, at the suit, at the build, at the face, and decided the badge wasn't real before he even picked it up. "These are good fakes," Davis had said, smirking at the ID. "I'll give whoever made it that much." Greg had stayed still. Quiet. Controlled. 12 years in federal law enforcement had trained him to read rooms, read people, read the exact kind of situation he was standing in. He knew what Davis was. He knew what this was. And he knew, with the cold, absolute certainty of a man who had dismantled terrorist networks across 4 continents, that Benjamin Davis had just made the single worst professional decision of his life. Davis didn't see an FBI agent. He saw a man in a nice suit with a badge he didn't believe, in a town where his word was law, on a Tuesday afternoon with no witnesses except a gas station clerk who wasn't going to say a word. He thought he had caught himself a con man. A fraud. A nobody playing dress-up in federal clothing. He thought the badge was a prop. He thought the credentials were printed in somebody's basement. He thought the phone numbers on the ID card would ring dead or redirect to nothing. He was wrong about every single thing. Because 47 minutes after Deputy Benjamin Davis zip-tied Special Agent Greg Beavers and threw him in the back of a parish cruiser, a call came through to the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Station. Not from a lawyer. Not from a relative. Not from a bail bondsman. From the director's office. FBI headquarters. Washington, D.C. And the woman on the other end of the line didn't ask questions. She gave instructions. Davis would spend the next 18 months learning the difference between a man with a badge and a man with the entire weight of the federal government behind him. He should have read the ID more carefully. Greg Beavers had not slept in 31 hours. That was not unusual. In his line of work, sleep was a negotiable commodity, something you grabbed in airport terminals and government-issue sedans, something you bartered against deadlines and threat assessments. He had learned to function on 4 hours somewhere between his second tour embedded with DEA in Juarez and his first real counterterrorism case out of the New Orleans field office. The body adapted. It had to. He had been in Baton Rouge since the previous morning, running a quiet coordination meeting with Louisiana State Police about a money laundering network that stretched from a strip of shell companies in Metairie all the way to a port contact in Tangipahoa Parish. The kind of case that didn't make headlines. The kind that took 18 months of wire work and 3 burned informants before you got close enough to smell it. Greg was close now. He could feel it the way he always could, a low hum at the base of his skull, like a frequency only he was tuned to. The meeting had gone long. It always did with state agencies. Jurisdictional sensitivity, procedural friction, the slow institutional dance of 2 organizations that technically worked together and practically competed. Greg had navigated it with the patience of a man who had learned that results mattered more than credit, and that the fastest way to close a case was to let everyone in the room believe it was their idea. By 2 in the afternoon, he was back in his bureau-issued Chevy Tahoe, heading north on I-10, running mentally through the timeline for the next phase. He needed to get back to the New Orleans field office by evening. His supervisor, Assistant Director Patricia Howell, had scheduled a secure briefing at 6. Howell did not reschedule. Howell did not accept traffic as an excuse. Greg had worked for her for 4 years and had never once been late. He pulled off the interstate at the Prairieville exit to get fuel and make a secure call. He had flagged a gap in the surveillance timeline that needed to go up the chain before the briefing, a 12-hour window where their target had gone completely dark, no cell activity, no financial movement, nothing. In Greg's experience, when a man like their target went quiet, it meant one of two things. Either he knew he was being watched, or he was moving something. Greg parked at the far end of the gas mart lot, away from the pumps, away from foot traffic. Standard practice for a secure call in an open location. He killed the engine, pulled out his encrypted phone, and was scrolling to Howell's secure line when the crunch of tires on gravel pulled his attention to the rearview mirror. A parish cruiser. Moving slowly. The way a cruiser moves when the deputy inside has already decided something before he's even parked. Greg watched it in the mirror without turning around. He noted the unit number on the door. He noted the time on his dashboard clock, 2:17 p.m. He noted the way the deputy sat for 11 seconds before opening his door, long enough to run the plates, long enough to make a decision. 12 years of federal work had given Greg an involuntary habit of cataloging everything. Dates, times, badge numbers, sequences. It wasn't paranoia. It was training. It was the difference between a case that held up in court and one that fell apart on a technicality. He set the phone down. He reached slowly to his hip, unclipped his credentials case, and held it open and visible in his left hand before Deputy Benjamin Davis had even cleared the hood of the cruiser. Standard protocol for a federal agent in an uncontrolled stop. Identify early. Identify clearly. Remove all ambiguity before it becomes a problem. Greg had done everything right. He would spend the next 4 hours paying for it anyway. Because Benjamin Davis had already seen everything he thought he needed to see. And what he saw had nothing to do with the badge. Benjamin Davis was the kind of man who mistook familiarity for authority. He had worked Ascension Parish for 11 years. Knew every back road, every speed trap, every face that belonged and every face that didn't. He had grown up 40 minutes east, in a town small enough that his father's name still opened doors, and he had carried that small-town gravity into his uniform like it was part of the standard issue. His boots were always polished. His cruiser was always clean. He kept his hair short and his chin up and his hand close to his belt in the particular way of men who have never once had their authority seriously challenged. He was not a stupid man. That was the dangerous part. He was a man who had built an entire professional identity on a specific kind of judgment, fast, instinctive, certain, and had been right often enough that he had stopped questioning it entirely. In 11 years, nobody had made him question it. Not his supervisor. Not the parish sheriff, who golfed with Davis's uncle and signed his performance reviews without reading them. Not the 2 formal complaints filed against him in 2019, both of which had been quietly resolved before they reached anything resembling consequence. Davis stepped out of the cruiser and adjusted his sunglasses. The afternoon light was flat and white, the kind of Louisiana heat that turned the air above the asphalt into a slow, shimmering distortion. He looked at the black Tahoe. Federal plates. He clocked that immediately, the way he clocked everything, fast, then filed away under whatever category his gut had already assigned it to. His gut said, rental. His gut said, out-of-towner. His gut said, something to look at. His gut did not say, bureau vehicle. It did not say, proceed carefully. It did not say, this is a moment that requires you to be exactly right. He walked toward the Tahoe slowly, thumbs hooked in his belt. He could see the driver before he reached the window, a black man, broad-shouldered, in a dark suit. Sitting still. Both hands visible. Credentials case already open and extended through the window. Davis stopped at the door. He looked at the credentials. He looked at Greg. He looked back at the credentials. He took them. He held the ID card up, tilting it toward the light with the exaggerated deliberateness of a man performing competence rather than exercising it. He read the name. He looked at the photo. He looked at Greg again, the way you look at something you've already decided is wrong and are simply confirming. Special Agent, Davis said, drawing the title out slowly, like he was tasting something he expected to be sour. Gregory Beavers. He looked up. FBI. That's correct, Greg said. His voice was even. Flat. Professionally neutral. Davis turned the credential case over in his hands. He pressed his thumbnail against the edge of the ID card, testing the laminate. He held it up to the light a second time. Then he let out a short breath through his nose, not quite a laugh, not quite a scoff, something in between that communicated everything he had already decided. Where'd you get this? Davis asked. Greg was quiet for exactly 1 second. It was issued to me by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said. I have been a special agent for 12 years. I am currently assigned to the New Orleans Field Office, Counterterrorism Division. The number on the back of that credential connects directly to the field office duty desk. You can call it right now. Davis smiled. It was a small smile, patient and unconvinced, the smile of a man who believed he was being played and found the attempt more insulting than threatening. I've seen some good fakes, Davis said, slipping the credential case into his own breast pocket. This is a good one. Whoever did this did real good work. Deputy. Greg's voice dropped 1 register. Not louder. Lower. That is federal government property. Davis was already reaching for his radio. He had stopped listening before Greg finished the sentence. Greg did not raise his voice. That was the first thing Davis didn't understand, and the thing that unsettled him more than anything else that followed. He had expected resistance. Protest. The escalating panic of a man whose cover was unraveling. He had seen it before, that specific unraveling, the way a lie collapsed under pressure when you applied it correctly. He was good at applying pressure. He had always been good at that. Greg gave him none of it. Deputy, I am going to ask you one time to return my credentials and step back from the vehicle, Greg said. His hands remained visible. His posture remained still. His eyes tracked Davis with the calm, unhurried attention of a man who was not managing fear, because there was no fear to manage. I have a secure briefing in New Orleans at 1800 hours. I have no interest in making this a longer conversation than it needs to be. Davis keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I'm at the gas mart on Airline Highway, Prairieville. Got a situation here. Need a secondary unit. You're making a mistake, Greg said. Not as a warning. Not as a threat. As a statement of observable fact, the way you tell someone their tire is flat. What I'm making, Davis said, clipping the radio back to his shoulder, is an arrest. Step out of the vehicle. Greg calculated. Not the situation, he had already calculated the situation in the first 30 seconds. He was calculating Davis. The set of his jaw. The rhythm of his breathing. The way his right hand had drifted twice toward his sidearm without completing the motion, not because he intended to draw, but because it was a reflex, a comfort gesture, the physical language of a man performing certainty he didn't entirely feel. Davis was not completely sure. That was important. It meant there was a version of this that Davis could still walk back from. Greg's job, right now, was to leave that door open without walking through it himself. He stepped out of the Tahoe. Slowly. Deliberately. Both hands raised to shoulder height, credential case already gone, jacket open to show the bureau-issued sidearm holstered on his right hip. "I am a federal agent," Greg said, each word clean and separate. "I am armed, as you can see. I am not reaching for my weapon. I am complying with your instruction under protest, and I am formally notifying you that every second of this stop is being recorded by the vehicle's onboard system." Davis's jaw tightened. "Hands on the roof," he said. Greg placed his hands on the roof of the Tahoe. The metal was hot enough to sting. "You'll want to remember this moment, Deputy," Greg said quietly. "It's the one you'll be asked about most." Davis reached for the zip ties. He had already stopped listening. He would spend a long time wishing he hadn't. The zip ties were a choice. That was the part Greg kept returning to during the 40-minute ride to the Ascension Parish Sheriff Station. Not the arrest itself. Wrongful detainments happened, they were recoverable, they left paper trails that became leverage. But the zip ties were a choice. Davis had handcuffs on his belt. Standard issue, department approved, designed for exactly this purpose. He had reached past them deliberately, pulled the flex cuffs from his vest, and cinched them tight enough that Greg felt the plastic cutting circulation within the first 5 minutes. It was a message. Small enough to be deniable. Loud enough to be understood. Greg understood it. He filed it away with everything else. The secondary unit that responded was a younger deputy named Carver, mid-20s, fresh enough that his uniform still looked stiff. He drove behind Davis's cruiser the entire way to the station, and when they arrived and he saw Greg climb out of the back seat, he looked at the suit, looked at the zip ties, and something moved briefly across his face. Not quite doubt. Not quite recognition. Something that hadn't yet decided what it was. Davis walked Greg through the back entrance of the station with one hand gripping his collar, not the arm, not the shoulder, the collar, in the particular way that communicated ownership rather than custody. The booking sergeant at the front desk, a heavy-set man named Tully, looked up from his monitor. "What V you got, Ben?" "Fake Fed," Davis said, dropping Greg's credential case on the desk. "Good equipment. Probably stolen. Running a con, maybe casing something out on the highway." Tully picked up the credential case. He turned it over once. He set it back down without opening it. "Okay," he said. And went back to his monitor. Greg was processed with the deliberate unhurriedness of a system that believed it had time. Photographed. Logged. His bureau phone was bagged and tagged. His encrypted tablet, locked in the Tahoe's center console, would be towed with the vehicle to the impound lot on Highway 30, where it would sit in 94-degree heat next to the tools and authority of a counterterrorism operation nobody in this building knew existed. They put him in a holding cell at the end of the corridor. Painted cinderblock. A metal bench bolted to the wall. The zip ties stayed on for another 22 minutes before a different deputy, not Carver, not Davis, someone who didn't know the story yet, noticed them and switched them out for cuffs. Greg sat on the bench. He rolled his shoulders once. He controlled his breathing the way he had been trained to control it in environments considerably less comfortable than this one. He counted the ceiling tiles. 16. He noted the time on the wall clock, 2:58 p.m. He thought about Assistant Director Howell's 6 o'clock briefing. And then he thought about what happened to federal cases when someone interfered with an active agent in the field. He almost felt sorry for Davis. Almost. It started with the phone number on the back of the credential case. Deputy Carver made the call. Not Davis. Davis was at his desk filling out the arrest report with the unhurried confidence of a man closing a file, already mentally moving on to the next thing. It was Carver, quietly, at 3:14 p.m., using the break room landline because something about the whole situation had been sitting wrong in his stomach since the parking lot, and he had learned early in his career to pay attention to that feeling. He dialed the number on the back of the FBI credential case. It rang once. FBI New Orleans Field Office, Duty Desk. Agent Simmons. Carver's hand tightened on the receiver. He had expected a recording. He had expected a disconnected tone. He had expected anything except a live federal agent answering on the first ring with the clipped, institutional efficiency of someone who answered that phone 40 times a day. "This is Deputy Aaron Carver, Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department," he said carefully. "I'm calling to verify credentials for a," he looked at the name on the case, Special Agent Gregory Beavers. The pause on the other end lasted less than 2 seconds. "Say that again," Simmons said. His voice had changed register. Not louder. Tighter. Carver said it again. What followed was not a conversation. It was a sequence of rapid, precise questions delivered in the tone of someone who had just received information that required immediate escalation. Field office. Exact location. Who was in command at the station? Whether Agent Beavers had been physically harmed. Whether his equipment had been seized. Whether his vehicle had been moved. Carver answered every question. His mouth had gone dry somewhere around the third one. "Do not touch his vehicle," Simmons said. "Do not access any equipment inside it. Do not process or transfer Agent Beavers under any circumstances. I need your watch commander on the phone in the next 60 seconds. He's, Deputy Davis is the senior officer on." "Your watch commander," Simmons repeated. "Not the arresting officer." Carver found Sergeant Tully still at the booking desk. He held out the phone without explanation. Tully looked at it. Looked at Carver. Something in Carver's expression made him take it without asking questions. Whatever Simmons said in the next 90 seconds turned Tully's face the color of old concrete. By 3:31 p.m., the call had been escalated to the field office assistant director. By 3:44 p.m., Assistant Director Patricia Howell had been pulled out of a classified briefing in New Orleans. By 3:52 p.m., Howell's office had placed a direct call to the Ascension Parish Sheriff Station main line. By 3:58 p.m., that call had been escalated twice more, up a chain of command that the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department had never once had reason to interact with. At 4:03 p.m., the phone on Sheriff Gerald Mouton's personal desk rang. The caller ID read, FBI Headquarters, Washington, D.C. Mouton stared at it for 4 full seconds before he picked it up. Down the corridor, in a cinderblock holding cell, Greg Beavers looked at the wall clock. Right on schedule. 3 vehicles arrived at the Ascension Parish Sheriff Station at 5:22 p.m. Not marked. Not loud. No sirens, no flashing lights, no theatrical convoy of government muscle designed to announce itself from a distance. Just 3 black Suburbans moving in clean, unhurried formation into the parking lot, stopping in a line parallel to the building's entrance with the quiet precision of people who had done this before and had nothing to prove to anyone watching. 8 people got out. 6 of them were agents. 2 were not. The 2 who were not wore suits that cost more than Deputy Benjamin Davis made in a month, and they walked through the front door of the station with the particular energy of individuals who had not come to negotiate. Sheriff Gerald Mouton met them in the lobby. He had spent the 53 minutes since the Washington call doing 4 things: trying to reach Davis, failing to reach Davis, constructing a version of events that distributed responsibility as broadly as possible, and sweating through his collar. He extended his hand to the taller of the 2 suits. The man looked at the hand briefly. He did not take it. Deputy Director Alan Marsh, FBI Office of Professional Responsibility, he said. This is Special Counsel Diana Reeves, Department of Justice. We need Agent Beavers released immediately, his equipment returned intact, and every officer involved in this detention available for interview within the next 30 minutes. Mouton opened his mouth. Sheriff. Reeves' voice was not unkind. It was simply finished with preliminary conversation. Your station detained a 12-year federal agent who was actively supporting a classified counterterrorism operation. His vehicle, which contains sensitive case materials, was impounded and has been sitting unsecured for 2 hours and 41 minutes. We are not here to discuss whether this happened. We are here to manage what happens next. How cooperative your department is in the next hour will determine a great deal about what the next 6 months look like for everyone in this building. Mouton cooperated. Davis was located in the break room, where he had been eating a sandwich and finalizing his arrest report with the unhurried satisfaction of a man who believed Tuesday had gone well. He was informed of the situation by Sergeant Tully, who delivered the news with the flat, drained expression of someone who had just watched their professional life rearrange itself and was still processing the geometry. Davis walked into the lobby and stopped. He saw the agents. He saw the suits. He saw the credentials, real ones, the kind that came with jurisdiction over him, and he saw, at the far end of the lobby, Greg Beavers, zip tie marks still visible on both wrists, accepting his credential case back from a junior agent with the calm, unhurried manner of a man collecting luggage at an airport. Greg looked up. He found Davis across the room without searching for him. As if he had always known exactly where Davis would be standing when this moment arrived. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Davis felt the sandwich turn to something cold and heavy in his stomach. The door behind him was already closing. The formal investigation took 11 weeks. It did not feel like 11 weeks to Benjamin Davis. It felt like a single, unbroken experience of consequence, a long, fluorescent-lit corridor with no visible end and doors that opened only into smaller rooms with more people holding more folders containing more documentation of everything he had done and everything it had cost. The Department of Justice investigation was thorough in the particular way that federal investigations are thorough when the subject is a law enforcement officer who detained one of their own. They pulled Davis's full arrest history. 11 years of stops, detainments, use of force reports, and complaint records. The 2019 complaints that had been quietly resolved surfaced inside the first week, reviewed now by people who had neither golfed with Davis's uncle nor signed anything without reading it. What they found was a pattern. Not a conspiracy. Not a coordinated program of deliberate misconduct. Something in some ways worse, a consistent, unexamined habit of assumption, applied selectively, sustained by a system that had never once required Davis to interrogate it. 31 stops in the past 4 years fitting a near-identical profile. 11 detainments. 3 formal complaints. 0 internal consequences. The DOJ didn't need to argue intent. The pattern argued for itself. Davis was placed on unpaid suspension in the 3rd week. His credentials were surrendered in the 6th. His union representative, a tired man named Greer who had seen versions of this before, advised him in their 4th meeting to stop explaining and start listening. Davis had difficulty with that. The harder blow came in week 9. The counterterrorism case Greg had been supporting, the money laundering network, the shell companies, the port contact in Tangipahoa Parish, had been compromised by the 2-hour window during which Greg's encrypted tablet sat unsecured in an impound lot in 94-degree heat. The targets had moved. 18 months of wire work, 3 burned informants, and a 6-agency coordination effort had to be partially rebuilt from an earlier point in the timeline. The DOJ added obstruction of a federal investigation to the filing. It was that charge, not the wrongful detention, not the civil rights violation, not the pattern of selective enforcement, that made Greer set down his pen and look at Davis across the table with the expression of a man who had finally run out of angles. Davis was terminated from the Ascension Parish Sheriff's Department on a Thursday morning. His badge and sidearm were collected by Sergeant Tully, who completed the process without making eye contact. The civil settlement came 4 weeks later. And then, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon in a federal courtroom in Baton Rouge, Deputy Director Marsh stood before the bench and outlined the sentencing recommendation with the brisk efficiency of a man who had prepared it carefully and felt nothing personal about delivering it. In the gallery, 3 rows back, Greg Beavers sat with his hands folded and his face still. He had worn his suit. Not his credentials. Just the suit. He had nothing left to prove. Greg drove back to New Orleans alone. No escort. No follow-up calls from the field office. No congratulatory emails from the chain of command. That was not how these things worked, and Greg had never needed them to. The work was the work. You did it correctly, you protected the case as best you could, you rebuilt what got damaged, and you moved forward. Sentiment was something you processed on your own time, in your own way, without making it anyone else's problem. He took the long route back. Not for any tactical reason. Just because he needed the drive. He had submitted his full after-action report the morning after the detention, 47 hours of compromised operational security, itemized and documented with the same precision he applied to everything. Assistant Director Howell had read it in full, which he knew because she had called him directly afterward, which she only did when something required more than an email. "You did everything right," she had said. "The case got hurt," Greg said. "The case is recoverable. We're rebuilding." A pause. "You did everything right, Greg." He had thanked her and ended the call. He thought about that now, merging onto I-10 westbound, the late afternoon light cutting flat and golden across the highway. He thought about the Gas Mart parking lot. The heat of the Tahoe's roof under his palms. The sound of the zip ties cinching tight. He thought about the way he had counted ceiling tiles in the holding cell, 16, and controlled his breathing and filed everything away in the precise, retrievable order that 12 years of training had made automatic. He had not lost his composure once. He was not sure if that was professionalism or something he would eventually need to talk to someone about. Probably both. Probably later. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. He glanced at it at a red light. Carver, the young deputy from the parking lot, the one who had made the call to the field office duty desk. Greg had left his direct number with him the morning after, without explanation, before the federal team packed up and left. The message was 3 words. "Thank you, sir." Greg looked at it for a moment. Then he set the phone face down on the seat and drove. The New Orleans skyline appeared in the distance as the sun finished dropping behind it, the city going amber and then purple against the evening sky. Greg had worked this city for 7 years. He knew its rhythms, its pressures, its particular brand of beautiful dysfunction. He had cases open inside it right now that needed his attention tomorrow morning, fresh and focused, without any residue of what this week had been. He would be fine. He was already filing it. The off-ramp came up and he took it smoothly, signaling early the way he always did, checking his mirrors out of habit, hands steady on the wheel. Nobody had asked him if he was okay. He had not expected them to. He was, anyway. And that, right there, is what it looks like when a system finally meets someone it cannot intimidate into silence. Benjamin Davis spent 11 years believing that confidence was the same thing as authority. That a badge in his hand meant more than a badge in someone else's. That a parking lot in his parish was a place where his judgment was final. Greg Beavers knew something Davis didn't. He knew that the truth doesn't panic. It doesn't argue. It doesn't raise its voice. It simply waits, patient and inevitable, for the right phone to ring. And when FBI headquarters calls the jail answers. "Now I want to hear from you." Did the system work the way it was supposed to, or did it only work because Greg was federal? Would the outcome have been the same for someone without that badge? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit different, smash that like button. It tells the algorithm this kind of content matters. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a new story. We drop fresh justice every week. Stay sharp. Stay fair. And never mistake a man's patience for weakness.